Stephan Sloan is one of the only people that has been to all three of these conferences and has contributed greatly each time. I'll let him tell you what he's doing these days, but among other things, he has been with Media Services Group for
17 years.
17 years. And also now is with
Angel Street Capital.
Angel Street Capital, and a number of other things that I'll let him describe. But he's put together some great data for us over the years, and in the past we've only let him squeeze it in between breaks, and I wanted to give him some dedicated time because it is great information. Unfortunately, because of pressing business, he has to leave this evening and won't be with us for the duration.
You won the bet.
I'm disappointed.
Me too. Sorry. Very sorry. To introduce myself, I'm first and foremost an avid AccuRadio listener on all of my appliances and devices, and a huge believer in the business. My orientation on the radio business has evolved back to about 2000 as somewhat appliance-centric. Could see that younger kids definitely wanted a computer, definitely wanted a game box, definitely wanted a cell phone, and I, as a kid, I couldn't wait to get a Walkman. That was cool. That was the appliance I wanted, and I could see it being lost in translation. I thought I sensed a little bit of anger in the room out there, so I'd start off with some humor because just keep it out there, guys. Just to pick up on Susan's quotes earlier about the head of the patent office saying everything that could be invented will. Just to add a few more relevant data points, Tim Armstrong, when he was back at Google, was a firm believer that radio inventory, commercial inventory on the radio, was a commodity, and that it was best sold in an open exchange. And it didn't take too long for that one to not seem play out so well. And the other point I'd make would be MySpace. I mean, it was Facebook. It was all set. It was all done. It had the whole place. So hopefully some of those same disruptive opportunities are here for us. I'll move on to the next slide. And this is one I came up with a couple of years ago. We were considering one of our axes, were all the radio assets going to remain in the same hands? We were looking at restructuring happening, and the same management team stayed in. And so it was hard to believe that there was going to be a big change. And now, and I stole this from actually disclosures from XM Sirius, because it's always easier to call somebody else's sister ugly than your own. So, but so a lot of these same statements apply to broadcasters. The fact is they're watching their covenants. And when you're watching your covenants and trying to figure out how to not trip in the next quarter, and your visibility is that close in, innovating isn't possible, and even reacting is difficult. And so when you combine these two statements together, which are fair enough, I think, for most radio operations, certainly anybody who bought a station in 2005, 6, or 7, it's a little difficult almost to genuinely participate in what the room aspires to, if that's your reality and your starting point. Continuing a discussion that Jim and I have had going for a couple of years now, examining what the drivers were for radio revenues and trying to understand them. We see going back to 2000 the peak, and my recollection of that time frame is when I was talking to people who were buyers and agencies in some of the top markets, San Francisco, San Jose come to mind, where car dealers couldn't get on the air. There was. Do you have a plug? Can I plug in? There was so much demand from .com boom that you couldn't get on, and the business had shifted away from selling product, from retail sales related activities, to just flat brand development. Welcome back from the break. And so the spike that we see around 2000 wasn't related so much to traditional radio clients' businesses, And then, no big surprise, the recession happened here, and this is the part that I want to start to examine. These are BIA estimate numbers, an estimate for 2010 projections for 2012 to 2014. And to understand and to test a little bit on these numbers, I broke out and looked further back in the radio revenue trend to 1980. Had a recession back then, and HLT, which a bunch of you remember was an awful lot of fun, and that gave us an inflection point for radio revenues. No big surprise. You put a lot more inventory in many fewer people's hands, and you have an opportunity to push revenue. What's interesting is that, gee, the pitch of this is starting to look a little suspect to me, considering all the drivers and all the tailwinds that the industry had here. And so to continue examining that, one of the things that we've done is express radio revenues as a function of retail sales activity. If the underlying driver is helping people buy stuff, helping people find things that they want, then these two certainly are related. And this brings up a significant point of concern, because as pricing power increased, the ability to go deeper into that retail dollar peaks in about 2000, but it breaks, and it breaks without reset, without an inflection point from then to now. And this is a conversation Jim and I have been having for a while, that, gee, you know, the slice of the pie is getting smaller here. When you calculate out BIA's projections for the coming years, what you find is that they've implied a floor for that. And while it's certainly conservative in a historical sense, the time frame, there's a question of whether or not it's conservative enough. If I do the same test for TV revenue and express it as a function of retail sales, you see its peak was back in 1984. Strong networks, not a lot of choices, still spinning the aerial on top of your house and not into the cable environment so much. And this is starting to exhibit a sawtooth pattern, easy to understand for political dollars that flow in and slosh right back away. But it still has a pitch, which tells me that, like other traditional medias, it's having trouble holding on to share. And so, considering that this projection comes from the same company that creates this projection, it's very interesting to see a break in the understanding and the projections for the ability to garner revenue in the future. Moving from that, Jim and I have been having an ongoing discussion about the value of advertising in various digital media, and to try and relate current radio terrestrial operations to that, we work towards calculating an effective CPM. Like any good bit of data, you torture it a bit and it lies. What we took a look at was the average quarter hours for all of the stations owned by the operators here, and Saga looks like an outlier. They had a number of markets that became unrated, and so in this calculation they went to zero where they had share previously. But what is odd is that there's a net fewer number of impressions being made here. Now, obviously, a lot of that has to do with a conversion in sampling methodology from a diary. A lot of these markets over the time frame from especially looking back to 2005. But it's not a zero-sum game like Clear Channel loses a little and Entercom picks up a little. The data that's there suggests that the industry is making fewer impressions. When you do just a quick cut at it, you take a look at mornings, middays, afternoons, assume a spot load, 12 minutes an hour, for each company, and take the average quarter hour, multiply it by the number of spots, that creates an impression count. And if you look at what they report for their revenues and relate that to the impression count, you can come up with how well they're monetizing those impressions. Again, Saga scores really well here for no good reason other than the fact that they're reporting some revenue against stations with no audience, and so that helps jack the number quite a bit. Of course, if you ask Ed, he's that smart. But you know, what you do get is a nice grouping. Knock out the top three and the bottom three, and you get a fairly tight grouping. And what you find out is, while there have been some fewer impressions made over the period, impression counts stayed fairly still while dollars fell out of the marketplace. And CBS is the first one to have reported 2010 numbers that we can take a look at. And what we see is about a 9% increase for CBS's CPMs over last year. And so Cumulus will be out next week, and we'll be able to start populating these sort of post-recession numbers.
We hope it's right.
There's no recession here. I mean, look, it's.
Yeah, you want to buy a lot? A lot.
Now I wanted to move into sort of picking up in John's discussion and internet onlys versus terrestrial, and using ANDO data and just a regular day, Monday to Friday. This goes back to the fourth quarter of last year. This number is very heavily influenced, obviously, by the presence of Pandora in that count. But it is a chart which 5 years ago, I think very few people in the room ever would have believed that from whole cloth you could make brands that attracted that much listening versus the power of Clear Channel, the power of Citadel, Cumulus, and their brands, and already having a relationship with the owner. To try and avoid myopia in the analysis, where we're just looking at ANDO media clients and just measuring people who want to pay to get measured, also take a look at Shoutcast and the population of streams there, which you can essentially just opt into as a representative sample. And God, I wish, Tom, you weren't sitting here, because it would be so much easier to say that. Unfortunately, he knows methodology, and I don't. But what we're looking at here is two curves. The first curve, highlighted in yellow and painted in black here, is the streaming population streaming through Shoutcast in 2007. And to say to you, we're expressing the percent of the marketplace by the number of streams it takes to reach 100% of the marketplace. And what you found back in 2007 was about half of the overall listeners were accounted for under the top 81 streams. And in a long tail analysis, half is the head. And so what you had was 10,000 some streams, 81 streams being responsible for half of the audience. Fast forwarding to January of 2011, the expansion is about double. There are 161 streams now responsible for the head. But what is perhaps most interesting is that a lot of the growth has come, and this is a logarithmic scale so you can still see the curve, from 2007 to 2011. The growth has come in streams with less than 10 listeners. Your 38 are rock stars, man. I mean, compared to the peer group, you're a giant.
You had to be good for something.
And what continues to be an amazement in that pool is that there are many, many more streams than there are listeners, which takes a little while to get around. But going from the opposite of scarcity of options, 7 FM stations in a market, to more options than listeners, I think is something good to help wrestle with. The other thing that really concerns me about this, I mean, the vast majority of these streams have less than 100 listeners. I think we're all really pulling for good advertising exchanges, because that represents a significant amount of ad inventory, which could mess up pricing ability and the ability to progress rate for the folks who are paying to get measured and are sort of trying to be the adults in the business. And I guess involuntarily, to continue as the Pandora cheerleading that's been going on, we've talked about radio as an app. And if this is the power of the app, that in 2009 and the phenomenal growth that John was talking about, with 150,000 average active sessions, to the new number in 2010, this was 451. Almost certainly, this growth is a function of that app functionality, that people took it into a new appliance, a new device, and liked the user interface and liked interacting with it. That's my 2 cents.